Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. It's time, once again, for another depressing dose of dismal Disney. I'm going to begin this video by making a pronouncement that is my personal assessment of the Doctor Who franchise. It's dead. And while I'm not actually happy to say that, nor am I the first one to do so, there comes a point when one must accept the evidence and acknowledge the truth. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please share the video on social media, please subscribe to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! Beginning in 1963, the Doctor Who series was always about the alien character known only as Doctor Who has the ability to regenerate. And when this occurred, a typically mostly seamless transition would occur when the current actor portraying the Doctor would depart, and the role would then be taken over by an entirely different actor representing the regenerated form. This quickly became a unique and cornerstone plot device within the show that has occurred more than a dozen times over the show's long history. And regardless of how uniquely each new actor's skills, experiences, and interpretations would nuance the character, there had always remained a consistency in how the Doctor's core essence was portrayed on screen, as well as the overall feel, nature, and narratives within the common fictional universe were written. And that was true from 1963 to 1989, and then from 2005 until 2017, which was when Chris Chibnall took over as showrunner, and from the onset, he demonstrated his desire to be inconsistent, as illustrated by his decision to cast the first woman to portray Doctor Who through Jodie Whittaker, as well as the woke preachiness that was added to the episodes. Naturally, the changes that Chibnall introduced into the show resulted in a declining audience and loss of revenue. But did he care? No, because Chibnall is no different from the woke identity politics activists who control today's Hollywood. And the only thing that's important to them is their ideological incentive to push their message, regardless of how much money studios lose in the process. So when Chibnall retconned the Doctor's history in the 12th season episode entitled The Timeless Children, he didn't care about the damage that he was inflicting upon the franchise because he only saw it as an opportunity to push even more wokeness, which it did at the cost of losing an even larger portion of the fandom and audience in the process. And regardless of what sci-fi or fantasy franchise I talk about within my videos, I always speak as a consumer and I share my insights from a consumer's perspective, which has become increasingly unwelcome in Hollywood and other entities such as the BBC, who, thanks to their widespread adoption of far-left ideology known as woke identity politics, can no longer make rational decisions based on common business sense and business acumen. Has there ever been a solid business case to justify the extreme wokeification of Doctor Who and other franchises being produced by Hollywood that has resulted in massive losses in viewers and revenue? No, but ideologues' primary concern has demonstrably proven to be whether or not their ideological messaging is being pushed towards the masses, and not whether it's actually a profitable entertainment business strategy, which it clearly isn't. So the ideologues have frequently turned to gaslighting both studio management and critics by claiming that both the critics and the viewers who are walking away are nothing more than racists and phobes, and that they'll be replaced by an audience that is just clamoring to see more and more diversity, inclusion, and representation on screen, which then never actually manifests because no such audience exists, at least not in the numbers needed to match or justify the deliberate driving away of the much larger numbers of viewers and fans who had kept the franchises alive via their decades-long support. And rather than admit that they're wrong, the woke identity politics ideologues will almost always double down on what they're doing, which then only further damages the franchises that they have co-opted for their propaganda. Many days before the most recent episodes of Doctor Who, featuring the show's first ever gay black actor to portray the Doctor aired, I had released a video in which I had expressed my concerns whether Ncuti Gatwa's portrayal would be true to the beloved character or true to his sexuality and personal ideological interests. While Jodie Whittaker's casting was a departure from the Doctor always being portrayed by a male actor, her portrayal might have been more successful had it not been hampered by two things. First, showrunner Chris Chibnall used the show to push his own brand of woke identity politics into the episodes that featured Whittaker, which made them preachy and consequently not particularly entertaining. People might attend religious institutions to be preached to, but they typically watch sci-fi and fantasy shows and movies to be entertained, and preaching isn't typically entertaining. Second, Chibnall took it upon himself to retcon the earliest history of the Doctor in the 12th season finale episode entitled The Timeless Children, which was done not only in direct support of the woke identity politics ideology, but to also undermine the fandom, which is what had kept the franchise alive for 6 decades, including the many years when the show was off the air from 1989 to 2005. But as I essentially said earlier in the video, the goals of an ideology like woke identity politics are almost always the polar opposite to the business goals of for-profit companies, and especially ones that produce entertainment. Russell T. Davies, the man once lauded by the longtime Doctor Who fandom for reviving the franchise back in 2005, is now the same man being criticized by the fandom for not only praising Chibnall's work and the much-hated Timeless Children 12th season episode, but for also pushing the woke identity politics agenda in a much more in-your-face manner himself than Chibnall had ever done. Responsible for casting the gay black actor Ncuti Gatwa as the once beloved Doctor Who, but also not allowing him to portray the character in a manner that would be respectful and consistent with the show's 60 years worth of content, Davies is instead using Gatwa's sexuality to push the woke identity politics message within a show that now bears more in common with shows like the 1980s children's show Pee-wee's Playhouse, as well as RuPaul's reality TV show Drag Race, which features an assortment of gay male contestants attempting to be the most outrageous and flamboyant drag queen. And at no point in the show's history before this had Doctor Who ever had anything in common with either of the two shows that I cited. Obviously, this creates a serious question with regards to who the target audience for this new Doctor Who series is. Davies, who unilaterally decided that this latest incarnation of Doctor Who should be viewed as an entirely new series, is actually correct in that aspect because the direction of this new Doctor Who series being co-produced by both the BBC and the Walt Disney Company for the first time bears only aesthetic similarities with the show's previous incarnations. Yes, the main character is still known as Doctor Who. Yes, the Doctor travels in space and time in a ship called the TARDIS that's shaped like a blue British police box. Yes, the Doctor is accompanied by one or more companions, but this is no longer a distinctly science fiction show. A far more accurate description would be science fantasy with the inclusion of beings that are typically only common in works of fantasy. And rather being a mostly serious show with moments of comedy, this new incarnation is the exact opposite, as it spends far more time trying to be funny and far less on the few elements that could be construed as increasingly softening science fiction bordering on fantasy. And this goes hand in hand with something that Davies said about Gatwa before the new episodes premiered, that he is bringing a quote-unquote lightness to the character of Doctor Who, and that they would, quote, not be delivering a neutered Doctor, unquote. Having watched these two new episodes that are entitled Space Babies and The Devil's Chord, as well as the one from December entitled The Church on Ruby Road, I can personally attest that Davies' descriptions were essentially accurate. But let's be very clear about one thing. It isn't just Gatwa bringing quote-unquote queer energy to Doctor Who, as Davies had previously alluded to, because the sources most definitely include Davies himself, as well as the character known only as Maestro from the Devil's Chord episode that is played by the non-binary drag queen known as Jinkx Monsoon. And I'll forewarn you here that if you haven't seen these 3 Gatwa episodes yet, I'm about to reveal some spoilers. And here are the spoilers. The December episode included the goblins stealing babies that they were intending to eat. After getting aboard their floating sailboat, the goblins were foiled by Gatwa's doctor when he began to untie the knots of their knowledge on board their battered ship. And as he untied the knots, doors would open, allowing him and Ruby to find the goblins singing and dancing in celebration as they prepared to eat the baby. But it became apparent to me, at least, that these might be euphemisms. Gatwa's doctor being in the show and untying knots may represent the series being freed from the expectations of longtime fans, who I believe are represented by the goblins, who are trying to eat and destroy a baby that might represent Davies' new very woke vision for the series. I could be wrong, but that's my impression. Then there's the Space Babies episode, which not only sees Gatwa's doctor become obsessed with pushing buttons, there's also a space station filled with talking babies in motorized cribs, and they are the ones trying to operate it. As farcical and nonsensical as all of this sounds, much like an episode of Pee-wee's Playhouse, what's clear in this episode is the doctor's obsession with pushing buttons, which is undoubtedly a euphemism for him and Davies pushing the buttons of viewers and longtime Doctor Who fans to generate an emotional response, as represented by a bunch of talking crybabies that actually need the Doctor to save them from themselves. The episode includes a monster created from the baby's snot, and what saves them is the Doctor using the baby's old used diapers as a source of propulsion. Does this sound like good science fiction to you? Does this even sound like good writing for a series opener? Talking babies, baby snot, dirty diapers, and motorized cribs? Oh, and did I forget to mention that in the first few minutes of the Space Babies episode, that the Doctor confirms the events of Chibnall's The Timeless Children episode because, you know, there can be no doubts that Davies fully supports Chibnall over the objections of the crying fans. Are we seeing a pattern yet? Then there's the Devil's Chord episode, which introduces the character Maestro, who is summoned in 1925 after a music teacher shows a student how to play the so-called Devil's Chord, which inadvertently summons the creature known as Maestro, which is a very flamboyant, non-binary drag queen that consumes the teacher's music and soul, and then proceeds to destroy good music from the minds of humanity. That's this episode's plot in a nutshell, but none of this sounds particularly like science fiction, nor does the character of Maestro, which, along with the entire episode, feels forced, contrived, farcical, nonsensical, and poorly written. Thus, I find it unlikely that most viewers will be capable of suspending their disbelief, which is an absolute requirement for any audience to fully enjoy a science fiction or fantasy narrative. Russell T. Davies decided to cast the non-binary drag queen known as Jinkx Monsoon, who prefers to be referred to as they or them, both in real life as well as in the character of Maestro, who also just so happens to be a non-binary drag queen. And Davies also had to include a woke educational moment on pronoun usage at the beginning of the show, just as he did a few months ago in a different Doctor Who special. But let's be honest, casting a flamboyant, non-binary drag queen in real life to portray a fictional flamboyant, non-binary drag queen character isn't much of a stretch in terms of acting abilities, nor is it good writing. It's bad writing, and who wrote all 3 of these most recent episodes of Doctor Who for Disney+? Only one person, Russell T. Davies, the showrunner. As I said earlier in this video, the biggest source of quote-unquote queer energy in this newest version of Doctor Who, if you can actually still call it that anymore, isn't Ncuti Gatwa, it's Russell T. Davies. And in the Devil's Chord episode, you can also add Jinkx Monsoon because Ncuti Gatwa was actually the so-called straight man to the overly comedic, unrealistic, and painfully overacted Maestro. And while Russell T Davies may think he's come up with something unique and revolutionary in the character of Maestro, no, he hasn't, because the character feels more like a derivative of the following. Tim Curry as Frankenfurter in Richard O'Brien's mid-1970s musical Rocky Horror Picture Show. The villainous character of Benita Bazaar as played by the late Martha Raye in Sid and Marty Krofft's early 1970s live-action children's show entitled The Bugaloos. And Liberace as the musical villain Chandel in 2 second-season episodes of the 1960s children's show Batman. For anyone who's familiar with any of these characters or with drag queens in general, the character of Maestro is neither groundbreaking nor interesting. But there's one thing that I have to say. None of these episodes were produced with longtime Doctor Who fans in mind. In fact, I'd have to say that the opposite is true, especially with comments from Ncuti Gatwa, Russell T Davies, and Jinkx Monsoon, who all said essentially the same thing, that if you don't like it, then don't watch the show. Whatever the target audience for this reimagined, excessively woke Doctor Who series is, it will be significantly smaller than the millions of longtime Doctor Who fans whose support helped to revive the show in 2005, which ironically was under Russell T Davies. But that was long before Davies had clearly drunk the woke identity politics Kool-Aid and sold his soul to the ever-woke Walt Disney Company. For me personally, I'm not actually fazed one bit by what Davies has done to Doctor Who in this latest iteration because for me, the franchise died in 2020 with the premiere of Chibnall's franchise-killing episode, The Timeless Children. And while I briefly had hope back in 2021 with the return of Russell T Davies and later with his announcement of Ncuti Gatwa taking over the role of the Doctor, that only proved to be misplaced even before these newest episodes had premiered. So I'll close this video by simply saying, rest in peace, Doctor Who. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.